Hi, guys. Hope y'all had a great spring break. I'm just going to come at you today with another lecture video. Now we're going to start on World War One, okay? Or as it was known, the Great War. It's important to note that they didn't call it World War One until after World War Two. They just called it the Great War, okay? So, World War One actually started in 1914. Many European nations went to war. These were the sides. You had the Central Powers, Germany and Austria-Hungary being the most important ones, and the Allied powers, Britain, France, Italy, Russia, and eventually the United States. The US is going to remain neutral in the first 3 quarters of this war. Okay? But most people in the United States did side with the Allies' cause. The United States moved to war because of Germany's actions. Germany was making several aggressive moves towards the United States. They practiced what was known as unrestricted submarine warfare. Germany would sink any ship in Allied waters, and they sank several U.S. ships even though we were neutral. The only reason we didn't go to war sooner with them is because they told the world that they would be sinking any ships in restricted waters. This was a violation of the freedom of the seas. The first big event that led the United States into World War I was the sinking of the Lusitania. On May 7th of 1915, the British passenger ship Lusitania was sunk by Germany. Okay, it was sailing from New York to Britain. 1,200 people were killed, including 128 Americans. Okay, this angered many people in the United States, and a lot of people thought we should have gone to war here in 1915. Germany said the ship was carrying war materials. The U.S. denied this, but later it was revealed to be true. The U.S. is going to remain neutral, but public opinion turned in favor of war. And for a little while, just so that they wouldn't provoke the United States into war, Germany stopped unrestricted submarine warfare. For a little bit. They would eventually start up with unrestricted submarine warfare again later. When I mean unrestricted submarine warfare, I'm meaning that they just use their submarines or U-boats to attack anyone indiscriminately. Okay, in January of 1917, Britain intercepted a telegram from Germany to Mexico that would later become known as the Zimmermann Note. Okay, it asked Mexico to invade the United States to keep us out of the war in Europe. They wanted America in the war, but not in Europe. They promised that if Mexico did that, that when Germany won the war, they would return the lands that Mexico lost to them. So, a couple months later, the United States declared war on Germany on April 4th, 1917. It was almost unanimous. All right, Jeannette Rankin, this woman right here, voted against U.S. entrance in World War I and World War II. In World War II, she was the only person that voted against the declaration of war in Congress. Something else that's interesting to note is that Jeannette Rankin was a part of Congress before women were even allowed to vote. So let's talk about the war at home. In 1917, the Selective Service Act drafted 2 million men into the military, and another 2 million volunteered. This exempted men with dependents, so men that had children, conscientious objectors, people that were against war for religious purposes, and essential occupations. Okay, there's a lot of talk about essential occupations now with the current climate in the world. Women were asked to join the jobs that men left behind. They were asked to work in war industries to fill jobs left vacant by the draft. They contributed more than just about any group in the domestic war effort. The war also created jobs for African Americans. They were normally discriminated against, especially in the South. You had this thing called the Great Migration during World War I, where African Americans were moving north, looking for industrial jobs left open because of the war. Approximately 7 million African Americans left the South to go north and find work. The Great Migration. Here's a map depicting that. Thousands of them also served in segregated military units led by white commanders. All right, this is progress at the time because normally African Americans were not allowed to enlist. Okay, the military would be integrated by President Harry Truman after World War II, but we will get to that in a later video. The United States is going to convert to a wartime economy. This required industries to mass produce or make war materials. They would change what they were normally making and pivot into making war materials. Civilians were expected to ration or conserve goods, pay higher taxes, and buy Liberty bonds so that the government could afford all of the expensive war materials. Liberty bonds are war bonds that let the public invest and help finance the war. A bond is basically you loaning money to the government, and they'll pay you back at a later date with interest. Okay? They'd be paid back with interest after the war, and this became a symbol of patriotic duty. All right, as you can see, this is a piece of propaganda. If you've done your assignment this week already, then you know propaganda is basically just media that is meant to persuade the public to believe a certain way. All right, this is Charlie Chaplin, one of the most famous actors of his age. The mustache, however, did not age well. Okay. The United States is going to create the Committee on Public Information. They need to sell the war to the public. They did that by controlling the information and encouraging conformity to inspire anti-German feelings. They need to get people to dislike Germans so that the war is more widely accepted. They did this through the use of anti-German propaganda. Like I said just a couple of minutes ago, propaganda is media that is meant to create a certain belief in the public. All right? Here are a few examples. If you want to look at these more closely, go ahead and pause your video now. So, the U.S. Food Administration is also going to encourage Americans to ration and grow victory gardens. Isn't that a patriotic name? Victory gardens. So, supplies from the commercial farms could be sent to our soldiers. There was a very poor harvest in 1916 and 1917 that lowered the food supply needed to support the millions in the military. So if you at home are growing a garden and feeding your own family, this will let the big industrial farms allocate their resources towards the soldiers in Europe. Okay, the government also mandated these funny little holidays like Meatless Tuesdays, Wheatless Wednesdays, and Porkless Saturdays. They issued ration books. This is an example of a ration card, okay? You could not purchase scarce items without providing a ration stamp. Once your stamps were gone, you could not buy any more of the item that month, which discouraged people to be wasteful. All right, the government also mandated rationing of coal and gas, which were very important to fuel the military vehicles. You had fuelless Mondays and gasless Sundays. People just would not drive on Sundays, and they would not use fuel like coal or gas on Mondays. All right. In 1917 and 1918, the Espionage and Sedition Acts made it illegal to speak out against the war or government. They said that people speaking out and protesting the war hurt the war effort. They wanted to silence communists and socialists, aka not nonconformists, and German sympathizers. The Supreme Court said that these acts did not violate the First Amendment because the government has special powers during times of crisis or war. Socialist Eugene Debs urged resistance to the war and the military draft. His presence was viewed as a threat to national security. And in 1918, he was arrested and sentenced to 10 years in prison. All right, he was released by President Harding in 1921 after the war was already over. Some women's suffrage advocates were viewed as un-American for protesting at the White House during the war. Many of them were arrested and sent to workhouses. Okay, here you go. You should pause the video now and just look at these images. These are what we call suffragettes. They would protest silently all day. The influenza epidemic. We know something about that now. In 1918, over 100 years ago, a quarter of the population contracted the Spanish flu. 500,000 people died within a year in the United States alone, 40 million people worldwide. The Spanish flu actually killed 10 times more Americans than the war did. It shut down factories, mines, telephone service, and all sorts of other things. We have a pretty good idea of what that's like now with everything shut down the way it is. So this should be a little easier to understand for you. Hopefully, though, we don't reach these kinds of numbers, and modern medicine can help more than it did in 1918. All right, here's a couple more images. If you want to take a closer look at these, pause the video now. All right, guys, I'm going to try and get another video to you later this week, and we'll talk about the end of World War I and how the peace treaties at the end of World War I led to World War II. I hope you're doing well, and I'll see y'all later.